It is October 23rd, 2025, and President Trump has, for the first time during his second term, signed off on sanctions against Russia, specifically targeting two major Russian oil companies. Now, we know this kind of action isn't going to bring the Russian government to its knees by any means, but it's being touted here in the US by the mainstream media as a way to put pressure on Russia. A reminder that this is the route that the Trump administration continues to take, as it also calls off plans for another in-person summit between Trump and Putin. So what does all of this mean for the ongoing tensions, and where else should we be keeping an eye on when it comes to ongoing U.S. involvement in the Middle East, looking at Iran, and of course, Venezuela? Well, we got into all of that and more with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Colonel Larry Wilkerson, a U.S. Army combat veteran, former Chief of Staff to the U.S. Secretary of State, and a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network. Colonel Wilkerson, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
It's great to have you on the show again. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that for the first time in his second term, President Trump has announced new sanctions against Russia with measures targeting Russian oil companies Rosneft and Lukoil. Now, the BBC described it by saying, while the economic impact to Russia is likely to be minimal, it represents a major shift in Trump's foreign policy, having previously said he would not impose sanctions until European nations ceased buying Russian oil. So, how do you view this move by Trump, as he's also calling off what was supposed to be plans for a direct summit with the Russian president in Budapest?
I think there's just a more of typical Trump meandering through the foreign policy arena, and that's a compliment. In this particular case, you see what a yes man, what a sycophant John Thune is in the Senate, because just a day or two ago, he announced that they were, rolling back their thoughts about massive sanctions on just the targets that you just mentioned. And all of a sudden, here's Trump. All he's got to do is pick up the phone and say, do it. And they do it. There's no debate. They just do it. So that tells you what the Senate is today. It's a sycophant for Trump, basically. And I don't just say that with regard to its Republican members. There are a few Democrats in there, too, who are that way because they hate Russia and they want Trump to continue to support Zelensky in Ukraine in this proxy war against Russia, which is rapidly becoming clear even to the most ignorant American, I think, as a war between NATO, read Washington, really, and Russia, and not this, punk Zelensky in Kiev. He's reduced now essentially to the Nazis, as Putin likes to call them, the Bandera gang. And those are the people who are around him, and they're the people who are protecting him, and the people who are insisting on, at cost of his life and fortune, in continuing the war and doing everything they possibly can to do that, except, you'll note, they're not going to the front line. Now, there's about 150,000 of these jokers, and they don't go to the front line anymore because they know they're going to die if they do. You may recall they were a big contingent in the Kursk insertion before, and they were annihilated. So they're not stupid. They're staying around and guarding the prince, as it were. They're not getting involved in the front line because they know they'd be destroyed. And this thing in Budapest, it's curious that, first of all, Trump would even have thought that he could agree to something in Hungary that would cause Putin, and I think it has caused his planners, not him personally, but enormous problems in terms of even trying to get there. I understand the last route they had was so circuitous and so across multiple countries that even the Russians didn't want to execute it. I don't know why Putin just didn't put up some really sophisticated Russian fighter aircraft and go straight in and defy. Sikorsky in Poland, being the ass that he is, essentially said if he flies over Poland, I might arrest him. Well, how are you going to arrest him? How are you going to get a hold of Putin? So it was kind of bizarre, the whole thing. Putin, I think, thought that, okay, I'll risk this if there is any risk associated with it because I still want to talk to Trump. Because he's been misled so many times now, he doesn't know where Trump's coming from. And if he gives up on him completely, then he's giving up on what I think is his real objective. And that is a continuation of the START treaty after it expires in February of next year, and widening that to include other nuclear powers like Xi Jinping's China. I'm hearing Xi Jinping has agreed to a multilateral talk between the three leaders of the maximum nuclear weapon states. That's what we need badly. It's much more important than Ukraine, much more important. And I don't discount the dead in that war, but I also think about the millions that are going to die in the nuclear exchange if we don't get a hold of these nuclear weapons and we don't stop this new nuclear arms race. So it was a very important thing, I think, that Putin would go through this process to get to that kind of discussion, because I think that's his ultimate objective. He knows he's not going to get anything out of Trump or the Europeans with regard to Ukraine. I think he's made a decision, and it's 99% right now. I'm going to finish this war. I'm going to turn the lights out in Kiev, maybe all over Ukraine, and I'm going to take Odessa too. And then they won't even have a port on the Black Sea. Nothing. And you may have seen recently that the EU declared there'd be no tariffs on any Ukrainian agricultural products coming into the EU common market. Wow. You think Polish farmers are going to agree to that, and German farmers and others? Hell no. So you got a battle brewing in the EU over that. And no one's looking really, and Donald Trump leads the pack in this regard, to stop this conflict. The only person who's doing it is Putin, and he's doing it through force. That's the only alternative he has. So this is really a disaster that Trump has created. And it's matched, I'm sure you'll get to this, but it's matched by the disaster that's unfolding in Gaza and in the Levant in general.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And when you look at the Trump administration and its handling of it, it has been interesting to watch, because I'm with you. As soon as they said Budapest, I was going, okay, that's right in enemy territory all around, right? How in the world is Putin going to get there? Unless they just wanted some show of force to kind of show Poland and everywhere else, this is what we're capable of. I don't know about that. But
and they're just, the other Europeans, I think, are just looking for an excuse to toss Orban out on his rear end in any way they can. Of course, you can't toss him out of Hungary. He was duly elected, but they don't like him at all. And they don't like the Slovenian president either. And it's clear why they don't, because they have sanity on their side.
Right. One of the few who's actually speaking up and going, why are we going to war against Russia? Right. This is not going to end well for us. We're on this continent. And when it comes to the position that Trump is in right now, I mean, he hasn't signed off on long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles for the war against Russia yet, but he's playing this game with them where he's acting like, oh, yeah, the U.S. wouldn't be involved, acting as if this is the kind of weapon that we can just send off to Kiev and they can shoot at Russia. But from everything I understand, that's not how it works. So how do you view kind of that push and pull of the Trump administration thinking that they can put this pressure on Russia, they can threaten Russia, while at the same time Putin is over here going, hey, I'm happy to talk with you, but nothing that you're saying or doing is going to change our overall goals on the battlefield.
And Lavrov is backing that up every time he speaks, English or Russian, he's backing that up. Let me give you a little data I found out the other day. I went to RTX, RTX being the former Raytheon, and one of the individuals there whom I know said, "We aren't RTX, we're Raytheon. Don't call us RTX." So that was the first battle going on between Lockheed Martin, the mother company, and what used to be Raytheon. But they're the main makers of the Tomahawk. In fact, I think they're the exclusive makers of the Tomahawk, unless they have, in the last 6 months, subcontracted to somebody somewhere else. And I was told that nobody wanted to do it. So they're still the sole contractor. But here's the deal. Remember, Trump said we have thousands of these. Here's the facts he gave me. Right now, the production rate is 38 per month, to the tune of about $2.5 million each. 38 per month. There is one existing contract. It's for the Navy, and it's for 2,200 missiles at that production rate. Now, do the math. You see, it's going to take a few years before they even get the Navies. Then I looked into the full rate production that they're contemplating on Block 5, which is the new 1,600 nautical mile missile, 20 feet long, so forth, the one that Trump tried to scare everybody with. And that one is for the Navy, Army, Marine Corps, and Australia and Japan. And it probably won't start production for another year, and then it's at 38 per month. So where are all these missiles you're going to give everybody, Donald, including our own forces? I mean, this is absurd, the exaggerations that he makes that are dangerous exaggerations. When he said, for example, that we're going to take on the Houthis and we're going to do it, well, if you watch Brown University's Cost of War project yesterday with Trita Parsi moderating, you understand that was $4 billion. And we didn't stop the Houthis. The Houthis are still doing what they were doing before, interdicting traffic in the Red Sea, though not much because nobody will insure and nobody's doing it. And all the shippers have gotten used and have absorbed the extra costs of going around the Cape. So they don't want to go through the Red Sea anymore. Mission accomplished by the Houthis.
Right.
Didn't do anything. Now he says, remember he said yesterday or day before, he said, if Hamas doesn't cooperate, we're going to destroy them. Well, you're going to destroy them like you did the Houthis? Because the potential for you and the U.S. military to destroy Hamas is zero, unless you want to drop a nuclear weapon or two on Gaza. And then you probably still wouldn't get them all. So this is a man who exaggerates in dangerous ways. We have real enemies in the world. And not the least of them could be, with this man in charge in particular, the giant on the other side of the world that features the number one economy in the world now. There is no question about that anymore. No question whatsoever. China is the number one economy in the world. They have a defense industrial base that is equal to or surpasses Russia's. They have 6,000 ships in their deep water fishing fleet, each one of which is roughly the equivalent of one of our 270 naval vessels. They're armed to the teeth in most cases. They put them out one day with flags and everything in the South China Sea. They couldn't get them all in. They had to keep a bunch of them in port because the line was so long it stretched almost to the Philippines. This country is a giant, a blooming, and it is the number one economy in the world. And so what are we doing? We're going after Venezuela. We're going after Colombia. We're going after other minor states. We're helping Israel to, the Brown Project also told the money we'd spent on Israel. Holy mackerel. We exhausted the most prolific war stocks we have in the world, which are for us. They're positioned in Israel because it's a safe place and a strategic place to have them. Israel used them all up. So not only did we give them $31 billion, we gave them the war stocks. I don't even know what our plan is for restocking them. It's going to take a while, though. That Tomahawk rate will tell you something about our industrial base capacity. So this is really dangerous, what Donald Trump is doing in both theaters. The one he said he would stop immediately upon becoming president, which he hasn't done anything to stop. And the other, which he is doing everything he possibly can to aid and abet and deepen and make worse.
Yeah, wow. It is incredibly concerning because you're looking at Russia and China and you're reminded that a lot of the reason why they have gotten to this point is because of the threats from the US, right? They look at the US and they go, we don't know quite what the US is going to do. Let's start ramping up our military industrial complexes at home because we're certainly watching the US spend, now we're up to $1 trillion on their quote unquote defense budget every year. And then as you're noting, when it comes to the Middle East, I mean, I'm looking around and going, okay, so they've got a ceasefire. They got the hostages back. I guess you can give them credit for that. They've got a ceasefire, but Trump's grand plan for Gaza is we're going to disarm Hamas. And as you were noting there, how are you going to do that? How are you going to come up with this? They act like they have this magical plan for Gaza that the Palestinian people are just going to accept. And then on top of that, they're sending JD Vance, Marco Rubio, and Jared Kushner to Israel to try to keep everything on board, because of course Israel is still killing dozens of Palestinians, not respecting the ceasefire. So how do you view kind of the current state of tensions when it comes to the Middle East?
I'm really worried about it. I've known for a long time that Israel was not going to give up on going to war with Iran, but I'm seeing some signs right now that Israel is very much aware of what it's going to be taking on. And one of the most injurious to Israel's strategic thinking aspects of what it's learning is that it can't do what it did before during the 12-Day Beautiful War, which it had prepared for, like the cell phones. It had prepared for a decade plus to have a fifth column in Iran. Afghans, Azeris, you name it, anyone the least bit dissatisfied with the Iranian regime on the border and willing to take $40,000-$50,000 from the Israelis, by the way, our tax money, would be a fifth columnist inside Iran. And they blew up a lot of things and did a lot of damage. Well, the Iranians figured that out. They have cut that to a minimum now, and there is no type guerrilla force in Iran for Israel now. So that's a new thing they have to take into their consideration as they plot a new attack on Iran. Not only that, I think their intelligence has demonstrated to them that the Russians are very serious this time. The Russians, the Soviets before, flew top of the line fighters and fighter bombers in Vietnam, in Korea. And when our pilots came up against them, they knew damn well they were not up against Vietnamese or Koreans. They knew they were up against the best, or at least the equivalent of themselves. So that's what's going to happen with these aircraft that Russia has been putting into Iran. And the Israelis know that. They're going to get shot out of the sky if they dare to fly inside the airspace. So they've got to take some new things into consideration. That's going to elongate this plan, I think. But I don't think it's going to be forfeited. I think Netanyahu is going to save himself, and he's looking increasingly in peril, political and otherwise. And he's going to try to save Israel ultimately by going to war with Iran for regime change and making it so bad for Israel. And he's going to know this. I think he already knows it, that we have to come in. Donald Trump won't have any choice at all. As I've said before, that's the war to bring down the empire, because we're talking 90 million people. They're very cohesive now. You can't hardly talk to an Iranian, even in the border areas now, that isn't angry at Israel, what it did to Qatar and what it did to Iran, especially the perfidy that accompanied the diplomacy and then the bombing. They're angry, and nothing. You're just saying that we've solidified Russia, China, and all our enemies in the world in terms of they're looking at us. We have certainly solidified the Persians and other people in Iran. They are absolutely assuring their government that they're on their side now. And that, I didn't think that could happen. I followed the revolt. Remember when the woman was killed and we had the women really joining in the fight? I thought that was very, very nascent overthrow of the government. I thought these women, and this wouldn't be the first time women have led something like this, but I thought they were powerful enough to where eventually they were probably going to overthrow the Islamic government. Well, they got close. They got really close, in my view. And then things sort of petered out and the regime softened. It really softened. Temporarily, but it softened. That temporary softening has been accompanied by now a more durable softening. So you got that too. The people are ready for Israel, and they will not be satisfied until Israel is utterly destroyed. So that's what Netanyahu's looking at now. And he's got himself in this cul-de-sac. He can't get out of it because that's the way he survives personally. And that's the way he thinks Israel survives, but only if Donald Trump agrees to come in. So that's what we're looking at now, I think, in the Levant. dangerous place. And of course, I mean, we talked about Bibi's nuclear armed submarines.
Yeah, that's the major concern, right? As we're watching Israel in this position where they don't have, well, I guess they do still have a version of Gaza. They're not carrying out daily attacks in the way that they were. Now they have this quote
Still
unquote
pretty bad.
ceasefire.
It's
Right,
still
yeah.
bad. They're killing quite a few people still.
Exactly. They've got the ceasefire publicly, but then they're still doing what they want there. And so then they've got Iran. But as you're noting there, I mean, yeah, everyone that I've talked to in Iran, those who are critical of the government, have said that in the face of this, even a very short war, they came together, right? They looked at their government and said, okay, we may have some differences, but we don't want our government to be overthrown and replaced by something much, much worse, or something that is just loyal to the US and Israel. And the US seems to be in this position where they've got the blueprint for it. They've carried out all of these different regime changes. And then they are looking over here and they're like, oh, yeah, what about Venezuela? And they seem to be so confident, the Trump administration does, that they're just going to overthrow President Nicolas Maduro there and, have their way with it and do what they want with Venezuela. That's a bit concerning to me when I look at this. And I know that Iran is still there on the list. Maybe they're moving it down a little bit. But how do you look at the position that the Trump administration is in right now and kind of what it's trying to quote unquote achieve?
With regard to South America, it's a mystery to me, other than what I know and have known since I was in the government about the oil in Venezuela, and about, I'm being told by experts in South America, other items right now that are in Venezuela. Venezuela is really a very rich country in terms of raw materials and things that might have not been even on anybody's scorecard 20 years ago, but now are very much so because of the technology that needs these items. So I have no doubt in my mind that the real reason we're after Venezuela, and ultimately possibly Colombia too, is because of their resources, oil being the leading one. And Charles Koch, for example, being the man who refines heavy sulfur oil in the United States, and having had a deal with Hugo Chavez, and then Maduro squelched the deal. I understand right now Maduro is whispering north that I can open that deal again and your refineries can run again. So that may be happening behind the scenes, but that doesn't answer your question. In 2016, Trump signed a presidential finding, handed it to Pompeo, who was then the director of the CIA, and Pompeo began a covert operation against Venezuela with the express purpose of overthrowing Nicolas Maduro. So Trump disavowing that he had anything to do with it in the first term is utterly ridiculous. This has all been leaked. And secondarily, when he says, I just authorized you authorized the CIA to do this a long time ago, which makes one of my big points about CIA. They don't change with presidents. When they go out to do direct action, and Joe Biden comes in later as president, and Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, and they look at things, okay, go ahead. That's usually what happens if the CIA even tells them what they're doing. So this has been going on for some time, and it's been singularly unsuccessful. And it's been unsuccessful basically because we turn now direct action by the CIA over to the Special Operating Forces. That way, the CIA doesn't have to express its views to its oversight committees in the Congress, the SISI and the IPSI. And the military isn't about to go before the SASC and say, hey, bosses, we're doing this with our military in Venezuela. So they get out of jail free all the time now because they use the military, and they're the ones who direct and organize and coordinate the action. The military executes it. That's what's happening right now. I suspect that's what's happening with these strikes on these boats too. And here's another problem that's being identified glaringly, because you know what the admiral in Southern Command has said about his tenure. He's leaving. And I'm sure that some of the reason is what we're talking about right now. It's extrajudicial killing. It's unlawful. Well, what's happening is what's happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Iraq, The special operating forces, with their own unified command in Florida and their own budget, don't give a shit about the conventional force commander. They don't. They've been ordered by the Pentagon and the president above the Pentagon to do what they're doing, and the unified command commander be damned. Often they don't even back brief him or her. They just go out and execute. I think that's what's happening here. We got special operating forces carrying out Trump's covert operation against Maduro in Venezuela. And the unified command commander doesn't even get brought into it. Otherwise, I think he would have stepped down. I think he would have stepped down completely if he were complicit. But he's not. It's all going through soft channels.
That's so interesting. And that answers a couple of the questions I had about it. Because you hear these reports, right? And you're going, okay, how exactly is this being carried out? Who all is involved? And as you're noting there, right, the overthrow of Maduro is something that the US establishment has wanted for a while now, has worked towards for a while now. And the first time around, they, kind of waited for there to be an election in Venezuela, said, oh no, that wasn't legitimate. We recognize this other guy. Well, this time around, they're going about it in a bit of a different way. They've got this Maria Corina Machado lined up, ready to go. She's got her Nobel Peace Prize now, right? She has a long history of being funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. And
the Israelis. Assad is in there big time too.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works out, doesn't it? So how do you see it, especially as we've seen this time and time again? Now we have these claims of, oh, we've got to go after the drug traffickers in Venezuela. It's like that's the new version of weapons of mass destruction to a certain extent now, where they've just decided of, okay, this is the excuse. Don't ask any questions about it. How do you see this kind of all playing out?
I think it's going to be a disaster for Venezuela if we do push this really hard. And I'm hearing we are planning on pushing it really hard. And if Maduro is already showing signs of trying, as I said, with coke and maybe some behind the scenes negotiations, he's trying hard to not precipitate anything. And if he keeps on doing that, he's probably going to expose himself in ways that he wouldn't otherwise be exposed. My recommendation to him as a military professional and somewhat of a political savant, if you will, is don't do anything except stand up and be counted in the UN, everywhere that you can, in the Inter-American councils, everywhere that the United States claims to be a honest broker. Stand up and condemn the United States and do it again and again and again in Spanish and in English. And stand your ground because you're not the guilty party here. The intelligence I'm getting on Venezuela is some trafficking in people, some drugs, but minor compared to other countries, and maybe some other things that are, shall we say, inimical to Mexico's interest or maybe some surrounding countries' interest, but very little, if anything, that's really detrimental or attacking the interests of the United States. Like, for example, Trinidad was all over the United States. They're in Chicago. They're in Portland. This is a cocked up scheme to help Trump get eventually to the Insurrection Act. And I'm afraid it's looking a lot like he might get to it because you got people in Chicago, for example, maybe elsewhere, who are armed to the teeth. And they're not going to take this much longer, I don't think. They're going to come out fighting against ICE. And then that's going to be it. He's going to declare the act and either regionally or nationally, probably nationally, and he's going to take action and he's going to try to deploy real military assets, probably militia, National Guard first. But that if that doesn't work, he's going to dip into the active duty pool, which is what Quantico was about in some regards. He was essentially telling them, I'm going to use you, and if you don't like this, leave, to fight my political enemies all across the United States. And oh, by the way, those terrorists that are out there too. But there aren't any terrorists out there of consequence, and certainly there aren't any from Venezuela. I can't find an intelligence professional anywhere, retired or active, who's worth a darn who thinks Venezuela is a threat to the United States. It's all cocked up by Donald Trump and Laura Loomer and Steve Miller.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly does seem to be. And the picture that you're putting out there, I mean, that's incredibly concerning for both at home and abroad. The last thing I want to bring up, going back to kind of where we started here, the position that the US is in, right? We have this administration and government as a whole where they now have a proxy war against Russia. They want war with China. They want more war with Iran. Oh, they want war with Venezuela. And apparently they want war at home too, yet we don't have the supplies or the production capacity for any of this. So, what are your concerns about where that leaves the US and how much they're still going to try to get into here?
You just put your finger on why I think I'm correct in saying we don't want a war with China. We really don't want one. And if you see something developing in the next weeks or months that looks like it's different, you're going to see Donald Trump making some moves toward Xi Jinping that'll try to abate that movement. Because all the things you said are true and much more. We couldn't fight China in a heartbeat. We would start losing so badly in the conventional phases that we would go nuclear. And I think Trump is even smart enough to realize that. I know Hegseth is, and I know some of the generals around Hegseth are. They don't want to fight China. Take my word, they do not want to fight China. And China, to its credit, does not want to fight us because China's winning. Why? You look at it the same way, but in a different context that you look at Russia with Ukraine. Why would they want a ceasefire? They're winning. Why would China want a war? They're winning. They're winning. On all fronts, they're winning. So why would they want a war? And we don't want one with them either because of what I just said. We know, our military professionals know it'd be a disaster. So I think that's why you see this concentration, because Trump likes the military. He likes to be seen with and using the military, contrary to his promises. But he doesn't want a war with China, so he's picking on all these little places, including, and he thinks, Gaza. But that one has a tendency and a proclivity now to turn big at any moment. And it's all because of that idiot in Jerusalem, Netanyahu. Here's some things from Haaretz this morning, just to close. I couldn't believe when I was reading this. First of all, the Shas party just quit over the IDF draft exemption bill. Okay, that's the first, I think, real crack that's showing up in Bibi's coalition. Not Smotrich or Ben-Gvir, but that could be. Bibi is the last surviving member of the October 7th security complex. And yet he's still forbidding, and his latest bid was really tumultuous in the Knesset. He's not permitting an investigation. That ought to tell you something about Bibi. And then the last thing was what Gideon Levy said in Haaretz, which I think Gideon is probably the most crucial critic of Israel, tells the truth more than anything else. He said, and these are his words, Israel's government prides itself on sadism, abuse, and torture. And he's utterly right. And if you think about those comments that Trump has made and others have made in this Western world about the hostages, about how they were treated and this, that, and the other thing, and then you look at the thousands upon thousands of prisoners, Palestinian, in Israeli jails who have had no recourse to due process, who are treated horribly, who when they go in might weigh 190 pounds, when they come out they weigh 70 pounds. They have been brutally tortured, raped, and abused, and we say nothing about it. Gideon is exposing this, and that is absolutely the way it should be. The world should know what beasts the Israelis are. Not every one of them. There's still some opposition, but I'm stunned every time I pick up a paper and read the stats on the polling amongst the Jewish citizens of Israel.
Yeah, a reminder, right? They didn't worry about the genocide, about the Palestinians being targeted. It was getting the hostages back. And now we continue to see Israel target the Palestinians, continue to see what they really are at the core and what they really believe in when it comes down to their treatment of the Palestinians there, and the US and its continued support. I know that there is a lot at stake here all around. The US seems to be getting itself into more than it can handle, and I always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down the latest, to give us a bit of a reality check here. Colonel Larry Wilkerson, a U.S. Army combat veteran, former Chief of Staff to the U.S. Secretary of State, and Senior Fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm very happy that Colin Powell is not with us anymore. If he were looking at this, he'd be crying every day.
I was going to say, what do you think his reaction to it would be, to having to deal with Trump on a daily basis?
Cheney was bad enough.
Here. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Take care. Thank you.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.